Imagine this. You're sitting in your living room minding your own business when suddenly you hear the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on gravel. You look out the window, and there it is, a car parked right in your driveway. But here's the kicker. It's not just any car and it's not just any driver, it's her. The woman who's been causing problems in the neighborhood for weeks. The one who always seems to have a complaint, a snide remark, or a nasty look ready to go. And now she's decided your driveway is her personal parking spot. What would you do? For one man, this wasn't just an annoying inconvenience. It was the final straw. And what happened next? Well, let's just say it's a story you won't forget anytime soon. Meet Marcus, a hard-working guy in his early 30s who's lived in his quiet suburban neighborhood for years. He's the kind of guy who keeps to himself, always waves hello to his neighbors, and takes pride in keeping his home and yard looking nice. But lately, his peace has been shattered by one person, Karen. Now, we've all heard the term Karen thrown around, but this woman, she's the real deal. From calling the cops on kids playing basketball to accusing the mailman of stealing her packages, Karen has made it her mission to be the neighborhood's self-appointed watchdog. And for some reason, Marcus has become her favorite target. It started small, a snide comment here, a dirty look there, but then it escalated. Karen began accusing Marcus of not belonging in the neighborhood, even though he's lived there longer than she has. She'd call the cops on him for the smallest things, like having friends over for a barbecue or playing music in his backyard. Marcus tried to brush it off, but it was getting harder and harder to ignore. And then, one day, Karen crossed a line. She started using his driveway as her personal parking spot. At first, Marcus thought it was a mistake. Maybe she was in a hurry or didn't realize it was his property. But when it kept happening, he knew it was intentional. Every time he asked her to move her car, she'd roll her eyes, mutter something under her breath, and take her sweet time. Leaving, it was infuriating. But Marcus wasn't the type to lose his cool. He tried to handle things the right way, talking to her calmly, even asking the homeowners association to step in. But nothing worked. Karen just kept pushing, and Marcus was running out of patience. Then, one fateful afternoon, something inside him snapped. He'd had enough. He wasn't going to let Karen bully him anymore. But what could he do? He couldn't just yell at her. That would only make things worse. He needed a plan, something that would send a clear message without breaking the law or stooping to her level. And that's when it hit him. He knew exactly what to do. The next time Karen pulled into his driveway, Marcus was ready. He walked outside, calm but determined, and did something so unexpected, so bold, that it left Karen speechless. But I'm not going to tell you what it was. Not yet. Because this story isn't just about a man standing up to a bully. It's about respect, dignity, and the lengths we'll go to protect what's ours. It's about what happens when someone pushes you too far, and you finally decide to push back. So what did Marcus do? How did Karen react, and what happened after that? Well, you'll have to keep watching to find out. Because trust me, this is just the beginning. Marcus had always been the kind of guy who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. He figured everyone had their bad days, and maybe Karen was just going through something. But as the weeks turned into months, it became clear that this wasn't just a phase. Karen's behavior wasn't just rude, it was targeted. And Marcus wasn't the only one who noticed. Other neighbors had started to whisper about her, too. They'd seen the way she treated Marcus, the way she'd glare at him from across the street or make snide comments loud enough for him to hear. But no one said anything. It was easier to stay out of it, to avoid confrontation. And Marcus understood that. He didn't want to cause trouble either. But there's only so much a person can take before they reach their breaking point. To understand why this moment was so significant, you have to know a little more about Marcus. He wasn't just some random guy in the neighborhood. He was a pillar of the community. He coached the local kids' basketball team, volunteered at the food bank, and even helped organize the annual block party. He was the guy you called when your car broke down or when you needed help moving furniture. He was the kind of neighbor everyone wanted to have. But to Karen, none of that mattered. All she saw was the color of his skin. And that's what made her actions so much harder to ignore. It wasn't just about the driveway or the dirty looks. It was about the underlying message. You don't belong here. The first time Karen parked in his driveway, Marcus thought it was a mistake. He figured she'd realize her error and move her car. But when she didn't, he decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was in a rush. Maybe she didn't realize it was his property. So, he walked over to her house and knocked on the door. When she answered, he politely explained the situation and asked her to move her car. Karen didn't even apologize. She just rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath, and slammed the door in his face. It took her nearly 20 minutes to finally move her car, and when she did, she made sure to give Marcus a nasty look as she drove away. At first, Marcus tried to laugh it off. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. But then it happened again. And again. Each time, Karen's attitude got worse. She'd park in his driveway for hours, sometimes blocking him in so he couldn't leave. When he'd ask her to move, she'd act like he was the one being unreasonable. "It's just a driveway," she'd say. "What's the big deal?" But to Marcus, it wasn't just about the driveway. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. And it was about the fact that Karen seemed to think she could do whatever she wanted. Consequences be damned. Things came to a head one Saturday afternoon. Marcus had just gotten home from running errands when he saw Karen's car parked in his driveway again. This time, she wasn't just blocking him in. She'd parked so close to his garage that he couldn't even open the door. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He walked over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. When she answered, he asked her, once again, to move her car. But this time, Karen didn't just roll her eyes. She crossed her arms and smirked. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Marcus felt his blood boil, but he kept his cool. "I'm asking you nicely," he said. "Please move your car." Karen just laughed. "Or what?" she said. "You'll call the cops? Go ahead. Let's see what they have to say." That was the moment Marcus realized he couldn't keep playing by the rules. Karen wasn't just disrespectful. She was daring him to do something about it. And Marcus knew that if he didn't stand up for himself, she'd keep pushing. But he also knew he had to be smart about it. He couldn't just lose his temper or do something reckless. He needed a plan, something that would send a clear message without giving Karen the satisfaction of seeing him upset. So he walked back to his house, got in his car, and drove away. But he wasn't running away, he was biding his time, because Marcus had an idea. And when the time was right, he was going to put it into action. Over the next few days, Marcus started paying closer attention to Karen's habits. He noticed that she always parked in his driveway around the same time, usually in the late afternoon, when she got home from work. He also noticed that she never stayed long. She'd park her car, go inside for a few minutes, and then leave again. Marcus didn't know what she was doing during those few minutes, but he didn't care. What mattered was that he had a window of opportunity, and he was going to use it. The day of the confrontation started like any other. Marcus went about his usual routine, coaching basketball in the morning, running errands in the afternoon. But all the while, he was keeping an eye on Karen's house. Sure enough, around 4:30 p.m., he saw her car pull into his driveway. Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline, but he forced himself to stay calm. He waited a few minutes, giving Karen time to go inside. Then, he grabbed what he needed and walked outside. What happened next was something no one, least of all Karen, saw coming. Marcus didn't yell or lose his temper. He didn't call the cops or make a scene. Instead, he did something so simple, so clever, that it left Karen completely stunned. But I'm not going to tell you what it was, not yet. Because this story isn't just about one man standing up to a bully. It's about the power of patience, strategy, and quiet strength. It's about what happens when you refuse to let someone else dictate your worth. And it's about the moment when everything changes. So what did Marcus do? How did Karen react? And what happened after that? Well, you'll have to keep watching to find out. Because trust me, this is just the beginning. The real drama is about to unfold. As Marcus stood in his driveway, holding the item he'd carefully chosen for this moment, he felt a strange mix of emotions. There was anger, of course. Anger at Karen's blatant disrespect and the way she seemed to enjoy pushing his buttons. But there was also something else. Determination. This wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. It was about standing up for himself in a way that would make Karen think twice before messing with him or anyone else again. He took a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and got to work. Meanwhile, inside her house, Karen was oblivious to what was happening outside. She'd parked in Marcus's driveway as usual and was busy going about her routine. She didn't think twice about it. To her, it was just another way to assert her dominance, to remind Marcus and everyone else that she could do whatever she wanted. She'd done it so many times before and nothing had ever happened. Why would this time be any different? But Karen was about to learn that Marcus wasn't like the others. He wasn't going to let her get away with it, not this time. As Marcus worked, a few neighbors started to notice what was going on. At first, they kept their distance, not wanting to get involved. But curiosity got the better of them, and soon a small crowd had gathered at the edge of Marcus's property. They whispered among themselves, trying to figure out what he was doing. Some of them were worried. They'd seen how Karen could be, and they didn't want Marcus to get into trouble. Others were secretly rooting for him. They'd been on the receiving end of Karen's behavior too, and they were tired of it. But no one said anything. They just watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Karen, meanwhile, was still inside her house, completely unaware of the scene unfolding outside. She was too busy scrolling through her phone, looking for something to complain about on social media. She didn't hear the murmurs of the neighbors or the sound of Marcus working. She didn't notice the tension in the air, the way everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. And then finally, she heard it, a loud, unmistakable noise coming from outside. It was the sound of her car alarm going off. Karen froze. What was that? She rushed to the window and looked outside. At first, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her car was still parked in Marcus's driveway, but something was different. Something was very, very different. Her eyes widened as she realized what Marcus had done. She felt a surge of anger, but also something else, something she wasn't used to feeling. Fear. Because for the first time, Karen realized that Marcus wasn't just going to take it anymore. He was fighting back, and she had no idea what to do. Outside, the neighbors were still watching, their eyes glued to the scene. Some of them were trying not to laugh. Others looked shocked. But one thing was clear. Marcus had done something no one had ever dared to do before. He'd stood up to Karen in a way that was bold, creative, and completely unexpected. And now everyone was waiting to see how she would react. Karen didn't keep them waiting long. She stormed out of her house, her face red with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she shouted at Marcus, her voice shaking with rage. Marcus didn't flinch. He just stood there, calm and composed, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm just making sure you don't forget whose driveway this is," he said, his voice steady. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in a long time, she was speechless. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen wasn't the type to back down easily, and she wasn't about to start now. She glared at Marcus, her mind racing as she tried to figure out her next move. She could call the cops, but what would she say? That Marcus had done something to her car while it was parked in his own driveway? That didn't exactly make her look like the victim. She could try to confront him, but something about the way he was standing, so calm, so confident, made her hesitate. She didn't know what to do, and that made her even angrier. Meanwhile, the neighbors were still watching, their eyes darting between Marcus and Karen. They could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm about to break. Some of them were starting to get nervous. They didn't want things to escalate, but they also didn't want to interfere. This was between Marcus and Karen, and as much as they wanted to see how it would play out, they also knew that things could get ugly fast. Marcus, for his part, was still calm. He'd done what he needed to do, and now he was waiting to see how Karen would respond. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't going to back down either. He'd made his point, and he was ready to stand by it. But he also knew that Karen wasn't going to let this go. She was going to come back at him, and when she did, he needed to be ready. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more tense, something unexpected happened. A car pulled up to the curb and a man got out. He was tall, with a serious expression on his face, and he looked like he meant business. The neighbors exchanged glances, wondering who he was and what he was doing there. Marcus and Karen both turned to look, their attention momentarily diverted. And then the man spoke, his voice calm but firm. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking from Marcus to Karen and back again. The tension in the air seemed to shift, and everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Who was this man? Was he here to help, or to make things worse? And what did his arrival mean for Marcus and Karen? The answers to those questions were still unclear. But one thing was certain, things were about to get a lot more complicated. So what happens next? Does Karen finally back down, or does she double down on her behavior? How does Marcus handle this new development? And who is the mysterious man who just showed up? The answers to these questions, and more, are coming up. But for now, the tension is still building and the stakes are higher than ever. Stay tuned because this story is far from over.